Our reflection today is on Saint Matthew the Apostle. Matthew was born with the Jewish name Levi, and he was the son of Alphaeus. As a tax collector, he would have been literate in Aramaic and Greek. Matthew was a Jew who worked for the occupying Roman forces, collecting taxes from other Jews. The Romans were not scrupulous about what the tax farmers got for themselves. Hence the latter, known as publicans, were generally hated as traitors by their fellow Jews. The Pharisees lumped them with sinners. See Matthew 9:11-13. So it was shocking to them to hear Jesus call such a man to be one of his intimate followers. Matthew got Jesus in further trouble by having a sort of going away party at his house. The Gospel tells us that many tax collectors and these known as sinners came to the dinner. The Pharisees were still more badly shocked. What business did the supposedly great teacher have associating with such immoral people? Jesus' answer was, "Those who are well do not need a physician, but the sick do. Go and learn the meaning of the words, 'I desire mercy, not sacrifice.' I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners." Matthew 9:12b-13. Jesus is not setting aside ritual and worship. He is saying that loving others is even more important. The ministry of Matthew. The New Testament records that as a disciple, he followed Jesus and was one of the witnesses of the ascension of Jesus. Afterwards, the disciples withdrew to an upper room. Acts 1:10-14. This room is traditionally called the Cenacle in Jerusalem. The disciples remained in and about Jerusalem and proclaimed that Jesus was the promised Messiah. In the Babylonian Talmud, the Sanhedrin 43a, Mattai is one of the 5 disciples of Yeshua. Later church fathers, such as Irenaeus, who wrote against the heresies 311, and Clement of Alexandria, claimed that Matthew preached the gospel to the Jewish community in Judea before going to other countries. Ancient writers are not in agreement as to what these other countries are. The Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church each hold the tradition that Matthew died as a martyr, although this was rejected by numerous heretics as early as the 2nd century. The Gospel of Matthew is anonymous. The author is not named within the text, and the superscription, quote, "according to Matthew," close quote, was added sometime in the 2nd century. The tradition that the author was the disciple of Matthew begins with the early Christian bishop Papias of Hierapolis, circa 100 to 140 CE. On the surface, this has been taken to imply that Matthew's Gospel itself was written in Hebrew or Aramaic by the Apostle Matthew and later translated into Greek, but nowhere does the author claim to have been an eyewitness to the events. And Matthew's Greek reveals none of the telltale marks of a translation. Scholars have put forward several theories to explain Papias, that early bishop. Perhaps Matthew wrote 2 Gospels, one, now lost, in Hebrew, The other, our Greek version, or perhaps the Logia, was a collection of sayings rather than a gospel, or the Dilectoia, the Greek, the Papias may have meant that Matthew wrote in the Jewish style rather than in the Hebrew language. The consensus is that Papias does not describe the Gospel of Matthew as we know it, and it is generally accepted that Matthew was written in Greek, not in Aramaic or Hebrew. Origen, a philosopher in later years, said the first Gospel was written by Matthew. This Gospel was composed in Hebrew near Jerusalem for Hebrew Christians and was later translated into Greek, but the Greek copy was lost. The Hebrew original was kept at the Library of Caesarea. The Nazarene community transcribed a copy for Jerome, which he used in his work. Matthew's Gospel was called the Gospel according to the Hebrews, or sometimes the Gospel of the Apostles, and it was once believed that it was the original to the Greek Matthew found in the Bible. This has been challenged by much more modern biblical scholars, 21st century. Jerome relates that Matthew was supposed by the Nazarenes to have composed their Gospel of the Hebrews through Irenaeus and Ephanius of Salamis, considered this simply a revised version of canonical Gospel. This Gospel has been partially preserved in the writings of the Church Fathers, said to have been written by Matthew. Ephanius does not make his own claim about a Gospel of the Hebrews written by Matthew, a claim that he merely attributes to the heretical Ebionites. Matthew is recognized as a saint in the Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, Lutheran, and Anglican Church. His feast day is celebrated on 21 September in the West and 16 November in the East. He is the patron saint of accountants, actors, bankers, bookkeepers, of course, tax collectors, and taxi drivers.